Hey, friend, excited to have you here today because we're doing an interview with Shane Enete, who is a professor at Biola University who has a PhD in personal financial planning. I didn't even know that was a thing. He's a master's in mathematical finance. And so, needless to say, he is a money nerd who has studied this topic to the extreme. He is a strong follower of Christ. And he wrote a book called Whole Heart Finances, a Jesus-centered guide to managing money with joy. And I've been reading this book. And I've just gotten some cool insights out of it from someone who has studied this topic thoroughly, extensively, to the extremes. And so I've enjoyed it personally. And so I wanted to pull him on the show and just chat about some of the things that I found really insightful from it. And so I think you're going to find this episode really interesting. I certainly did. And so I'm excited to have him on to chat. So without further ado, let's bring you to Shane. One thing, just as an opening question here, why do you think that money doesn't satisfy? You know, like the Bible talks about this, but why do you think that so many of us try to just attempt to get it to satisfy things in our life, to bring some peace, some satisfaction, but as I think we both know, even if you are ultra wealthy, it just doesn't do it. Why do you think that is?
I have a scientific response, kind of a biological one, and then a spiritual response. So I'd say just looking at biologically how we're made, God's made us. One of the greatest traits that humans have in the midst of a world of pain is that we can adapt. And so when things happen, war, disease, even as we age, as there's loss, there's pain, but then there's adaptability. So we slowly or quickly get used to kind of our new circumstances, and then that's our saving grace in most of life.
Yeah.
But that's a double-edged sword. So you adapt to pain, and that's really good, but you also adapt to wealth. You adapt to good things. So, one example would be you put on a silk robe. It feels incredible. You're like, this is the greatest thing I've ever put on. And then it only takes maybe 5 minutes, 15 minutes, and all of a sudden you're totally used to it, and your body is completely adapted. And in the same way, steak dinner, you experience it, it's amazing. But if you have a steak dinner every day, it's going to be something that's actually a curse to you, as we've seen with the quail and all of that. So I think biologically, God's made it so we adapt. And what it does is it puts us on a hedonic treadmill, is what the behavioral finance people say. And so because we adapt to pleasure, we need more of it to be able to enjoy. And so it's an addictive thing. So wealth, we get used to our level of wealth, so we need more, and to be able to get that ping of pleasure. And then we get used to that, so we need more. And so, that famous quote of how much is enough, and the rich guy says just a little bit more. That's that hedonic treadmill. So that's like just biologically, just looking at how God's made us, that's a reason why wealth never satisfies. But spiritually, wealth is always going to be tied to our physical bodies that are decaying. Everything about wealth is material by definition, and we are eternal. And so if we put all of our hope in something that's going to go away, that's something so finite, that's a vapor, then it'll always disappoint us. There's no way it'll ever fill the hole. And so St. Augustine says, if your loves are for things that are inferior, then you're dragged down by that. Whereas if you have a passionate love for things that are eternal, then that elevates you towards your true purpose. So that's kind of how I'd respond to that question.
That's great. No, I think that's really good. And it reminds me of a C.S. Lewis quote. I think I can't remember the quote, but something to that extent, where he said, like, if you're craving something that you feel like it can't be satisfied, it must be an indication that there's something can be only satisfied. Like, I'm butchering the quote, but I think you get the idea. And I think that's such a great way to put it and illustrate it. And
you're never happy about time. That must mean we were made for eternity, is kind of the gist of it.
Yeah. And in the book, so I've written a book, and so I know what it's like to be asked questions about the book, and like, I don't even remember that. So if you don't remember this, that's fine. But Do you remember this study of the ultra rich and kind of what came out of that you were talking about in one of the early
Yeah,
chapters?
yeah. Do you want me to?
Do you want to talk a little bit about
Yeah,
that?
sure. So, they did a study of, I think it was 165 ultra rich individuals. And, these are people with net worths that are in the, more than 20 million, if not higher, maybe 100 million. And so they found this like group and they surveyed them, and some, they were generally dissatisfied. They were probably at the average satisfaction level, if not slightly below, which that alone is something to note.
Yeah.
And then, but some
Yeah.
of the quotes were what were incredible. One Christian, they asked him, this super wealthy person, "What's your purpose?" He gave the Christian answer. He said it's, to seek the Lord, to glorify Him. And then he just kind of put on a little side note at the end, said, and I won't really be satisfied until I can have, a net worth of at least X amount of dollars. And it was something obscene, like, I really need to have at least $50 million of cash in the bank to feel safe or feel satisfied. And so just that juxtaposition of Christian giving the Christian answer and then his actual working out of his life financially was completely disconnected to his faith. So that study was very eye-opening for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, as a believer, and I'm assuming you've wrestled with this as well, is it's so tricky because it's like I think all of us, in our flesh and our pharisaical nature, want to draw the line and say it's a number. Like once you have this number, you're wrong. Once you have this much in savings or whatever, and like you talk about in the book, this idea of it's good to have savings. It's good to have money stored up. Like that's what Proverbs talks about. There's wisdom in that. But when our heart gets to this place where we begin trusting in that, man, that's a problem. That's a place we don't want to be. But yet we can never, like you said originally in the first question there, like we don't know where that line is. And so it's this constant thing of needing to check with the Lord on our heart, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'd say my willingness to be generous is my thermometer or my barometer for whether I have a healthy relationship with money. So
Yeah.
if by being generous and I give a little bit more, if I have a strong resistance to that, if that seems really like God's robbing me or God's gonna ask something that's gonna harm me because it's my money, anything like that. And it's not the amount to give. It's just if I get paid, let's say a windfall from a tax refund or even just my typical paycheck, if I'm thinking about whether there's needs around me and just being generous, if it sounds like the worst thing in the world to be giving beyond kind of what I'm used to
Yeah.
giving, then I know my heart is starting to kind of move along to that siren song of culture saying,
Yeah.
money is what satisfies, money is what's good, money is what will provide. But if I'm like, oh, I would love to give, I really want to give, if that's kind of what I'm actually wanting, and then I'm kind of weighing that with the budget, with kind of my children's needs, my wife's needs, community needs, church needs. Like I'm kind of just seeing and I'm walking alongside the Lord. Then that just feels like okay, my heart is I'm wanting to give, and now I'm just kind of working it out practically. That's the good heart posture, and I another thing that really helps is if my income goes up, it doesn't increase my standard of living, it increases my standard of giving. So if I'm
Yeah.
viewing income as this something that's God's providing not only for my household needs, but also for potentially the needs around me, that also is kind of just a good. I know that my heart is in not too bad of a place if I'm having that posture, but I know when I don't
Yeah.
have that posture, and that's when I'm like, all right, it's like being sick. I have a virus. I need
Mhm.
to put in the anecdotes. I need to start to give more in order to heal this thing, get the poison out, essentially.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that uh, is two different examples, from the New Testament come to mind that Jesus interacted with. And so the first one was a rich young ruler. Okay, and so Jesus said, if you want to be perfect, go give, go be generous. To which he didn't want to. Okay, and then you have Zacchaeus, and so Zacchaeus, also wealthy from not very righteous means, probably. And Jesus, like, we don't have the conversation, but Jesus goes over his house for dinner. They spend time together, and then Zacchaeus comes out and gives. And then Jesus says, okay, now salvation has come to your house. So I wonder, well, either way, regardless of whether Jesus told him to give, he walks away and he does give. And in both cases, you can see that it looks like the antidote, like you're saying, is generosity. That's the thing. And Zacchaeus picked it and the rich young ruler didn't. And so just pretty powerful kind of illustration of what you're saying.
Yeah, and that's the Trinity is all self-giving. That's their very nature. So they're always giving. So Holy Spirit is giving of itself, Himself, Jesus giving of Himself, God giving of Himself. It doesn't withhold His greatest treasure. For God to love the world, He gave, and so this Trinity, then we're woven into. And I just love it. So just read the book. I think it's called The Book of Giving, and it was just a beautiful book. But one of the main points was that as we enter into this community of the Trinity, we can stay in as long as we want, and it's our great joy. But if we start acting in a way where we're actually withholding and not being generous and just kind of like holding on, then that actually kind of kicks us out of the community. We're no longer experiencing the self-giving Trinity because we're not acting in that way. And so in many ways, we'll know we're kind of out in the cold outside, and we can always get back in anytime. That's grace. But there's also just this reality that if we start acting like we're not in the Trinity, that we're not in Christ, then we're going to experience the chill and the cold of the outside and not the warmth of the Trinity's, self-giving nature. And so that, again, we're feeling the cold, the anxiety, all of the hardship of a fractured heart where we're outside of this self-giving relational amazingness of being in Christ. And then the antidote to get back in is to start behaving like who we are. This is who we are now, is we are in Christ. And so His generosity flows through us, but it takes practice. It takes intentionality. It takes God's Spirit. And even financial planning itself is a skill to learn to then unleash a greater level of generosity. So, but yeah, I know when I'm feeling that cold, if I start feeling this heaviness about money, then I think I'm probably grabbing and grasping, and I don't have an open hand, I have a closed hand. And so let's go ahead and start acting like the Trinity, and, by God's grace, by His help, and then all of a sudden I'm going to be back into that warm, cozy fire, near the fire in the home where the Trinity is. And it's a lovely place to be. And it's it's who we are now. So
yeah, it's who we're created to be. So another thing I really loved in the book that you were talking about was this analogy comparing savings to like a water reservoir or a farmer's barn and like that. Can you unpack this a little bit and just kind of share this analogy and how you broke that down?
Yeah. So I love using metaphor analogy with money, because money is so abstract. But, and Jesus often uses metaphor and analogy to help unpack these really abstract concepts like His kingdom and, being a disciple. And so in the same way, I just naturally want to see what about God's creation helps show truth and show behavior and helps us work out what we're supposed to do. And so water, to me, is really helpful to look at. And water is something that is meant to flow. And so when water flows, it's a refreshing, it helps, it brings life. But when water stops flowing and it collects in a stagnant kind of pond, it actually becomes toxic. And even if it's a big body of water, if the flow's gone, then the help is gone and the goodness of it is gone. It actually becomes toxic to people around as well as inside. And so a really cool meta kind of narrative for this is that the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea are fed by the Jordan River. They're both fed by the same exact water source. So the life of the Jordan River feeds into the Sea of Galilee, and the Sea of Galilee is thriving. It has fish, it has all sorts of life around it. It's a big blessing to the community. And then you just keep going down with this Jordan River, and it feeds into the Dead Sea. And everything around the Dead Sea is dead, and the Dead Sea itself is dead. And there's only one real difference between the two, and that's that the Sea of Galilee has a flow going, it has an outlet, It takes what it's given and it passes it along. And the Dead Sea just collects and collects and collects. And then the salts, it changes the balance of the water to where the salts kills everything. And so it's like the opposite of
Yeah.
being, it's like a saltiness that loses its ability to be a blessing. And so, but the whole goal is to flow. So like speaking about saving, reservoirs are like, and marshes that kind of build around bodies of water, they're like incredibly useful because there's seasons where the flow stops. And it's just natural, there's droughts, there's all sorts of different things that can happen to a flow of water. There's seasons, even just like winter. And so the reservoir is like, it's just there to help facilitate the outflow because there's people that need that water to keep flowing. And so if you have a good, healthy reservoir, then you can sustain the flow out and also sustain your level of kind of your body of water needs to be at a certain level. It can't go too drained, otherwise it can't hold water anymore. And then if it gets too, it doesn't flow anymore, then it becomes the Dead Sea. So anyway, so I like thinking about savings as let's use savings to facilitate the greatest flow of generosity in our lives, and we can use financial planning to look at our earned income as it goes up and down and say, how can we right now, most of finance is how can we generate the highest level of consumption over our life by using saving? But I would rather flip the
Mhm.
script and say, how can we use savings to generate the highest level of generosity across?
Yep.
And our life just has a flow where our earned income will shut off as our elder years approach, or failed health earlier than that, or unemployment, or just seasons of craziness. So yeah,
Yeah.
so I like that metaphor for that reason.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And yeah, and so okay, I love that. Let's talk about what did you say about the
Yeah,
barn? Okay, I want to talk about that because I liked that picture as well. Complete that circle for me, will
sure.
you?
Yeah. So the barn, a farmer, if you think about, I've been reading a lot of Wendell Berry and I've just been loving it,
Yeah.
and he talks, he's a farmer
Yeah.
and a professor. But the barn is made to facilitate farming. So what a barn does is it holds your seed stock so that you can plant new harvests in the, in the spring. It holds the harvest from the previous fall. The whole purpose of it is to help the farmer become a better farmer. And it looks at the reality of seasons, that there is a harsh winter that comes every year, and you want to store resources to be able to weather that winter. And the big mistake in Jesus's parable of the rich fool is that the farmer said, I have a bumper crop. I can actually build a couple extra barns, store extra food, and then stop farming. And
Yeah.
so I think that was what was foolish, was to say that you're going to do all this work so that you can all of a sudden stop living for what's real, which is community, it's relationships, it's the eternal. And so the barn is actually a necessary tool to help the farmer be a better farmer because of the reality of winter. And for us, savings are a necessary tool for us to avoid debt, because if we don't have savings, then we have to get into debt when there's an emergency. And it could be debt with family, it could be debt with the bank, it could be debt in some with government. And so to avoid being beholden to another is to show off our freedom that we're meant to show off in Christ. And then also just practically, when you have some savings set aside for winter, for emergencies, then you're able to be just better contributor to the needs around you in a more sustainable way, both the needs of your own body and your ministry, as well as the family and your children and the church and all of that.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, and I'm thinking about 2 Corinthians 9, where Paul's using again a farming metaphor for this whole thing, and he talks about the two purposes. It's like some of what comes to you is meant to be eaten, consumed, and some is meant to be planted. Of this seed that comes in, and I just love that. I love that because I think a lot of I probably like you too hear a lot of different perspectives on money, and and some of which are, yeah, you should never save anything. Just trust God that He's going to show up every minute and provide everything. And it's like, yeah, it's like God can, He absolutely can, but there's just no getting around the fact that there is wisdom in saving and preparation. And obviously, Joseph being a big example among many proverbs that mention this. And so there's something there. But like we were talking about at the same time, like, but not being, the parable of the rich fool you're talking about, where it's like, well, I just want to get so much that I never need to trust God again, that I never need to work, whatever the thing might be.
Yeah.
What is the thing we're trying to insulate ourselves from? And so yeah, just like many things with finances, there's this balance, and I think that just provides, it's just a great way to illustrate it. So I just love that.
Thanks. Yeah, that's fun.
All right. I want to talk about, you mentioned in here, and I think this came from another author, but this idea, the money
Yeah,
dimensions,
yeah,
these three money dimensions of acquisition, use, and
yeah.
management. And I thought this was fascinating. Do you want me to read things out of your book in relation to this? Do you feel like you have a good memory of these
Yeah.
pieces that you could
Yeah,
explain it?
I'll explain a little bit. So Dr. Gallo came up with this, and psychologists looking at how people relate to money and the natural disposition they might have when you give someone some money. So let's say I just hand you a $100 bill. How are you going to look at that money?
Thank you, by
Oh,
the
for
way.
sure. Yeah. Like, so I have two kids. Sage is my daughter, she's 10, Silas, son, 8. If I hand them money, they're going to look at it wildly different. And same with me and my wife. Like, we just have a natural
Yeah.
disposition. And so there's dimensions about money, and you're going to kind of have all three working with you, but at some point, your personality just naturally gravitates towards one narrative. So the three narratives about money or dimension is, the first one is that when someone gives you some money, you instantly look at it as a token, you gamify it, and you see it as a collectible. You're like, this is a game. I want to win the game. I want to collect the money. I want to, basically level up as much as I can. So you're not really, being consumptive. You're more just kind of like, yeah. So there's a healthy expression of this, where you're just kind of like, I want to play the game well. And this is a
Yeah.
type of game I want to play well. And then it can go off the rails where you become insatiable with your desire for gold. You become like the dragon in The Hobbit, where you just want it for the sake of wanting it. And the next dimension is use, and this is where anytime you receive money, you look at it like a ticket. And if you remember fairs, and they still work this way, I think, in many parts, where you buy a bunch of tickets, and then each ticket, can get you on a ride or can let you play a game. And so,
Yeah.
you have all these different like carnival tickets. And so you would actually look at this money as like a big reel of carnival tickets, and you're like, "Ooh, what can I do with this money? Like, how can I consume this in some way that will bring me pleasure?" And so you'll instantly look at any money as some ticket for consumption, and we can consume, things just for basic, like, in life's enjoyment, or you can consume other things like saving. So you would be consumed if you looked at it as something that would help me feel safe by getting a bigger and bigger bank account. Then you're looking at it as use. You're using it for consumption, or you could
Yeah.
use it for pleasure, or use it for all sorts of other things. So my family, I grew up where everyone around me was a you, and they always looked at money as something that you would use, and there's healthy ways, super healthy ways of viewing money in this way, especially if you're always trying to use it to bless others, and so always trying to like say, let's do this great thing together. And then the last one is manager or management. And so this one, anytime you give money to a person with the M dimension, they look at it as a problem that needs to be solved, as a to do. Money is not something that is like that they instantly want to consume or they instantly want to level up on. They just say, okay, I have to now, this is a puzzle. I need to make a decision about what to do with this. And so that's 100% me and 100% my daughter, Sage, where anytime you give them money or me money, I'm like a squirrel. I'm like, all right, first thing to do is you put it in your cheek, and then you find a place to set it down, and then now let me find a rock to just sit and think about what to do, and let me let me just work through my spreadsheets. And so yeah, that's basically the M. And you can become, if you're healthy in this, it's great. You're, a good manager for your family. But man, if you're unhealthy on the M, then you're going to be micromanaging. You're going to be trying to control everything about how people are behaving. And so I have to watch out as an M to not micromanage and control, not put every person in my life in a spreadsheet and say like, you better behave this way, otherwise we're all in trouble. So
Yeah. So
well,
so how does someone, because I think, most people listening can maybe identify with one more than the other. And I think I generally fall in the same bucket as you, management. I think Linda is probably use. But like, how do you take that and use that for practical benefit? Just that understanding of which category you might lean into.
I think it's so being self-aware when it comes to your relationship with money is very important, because the top reason for relational conflict often is money. It's a top reason for divorce, and so if you're fighting about money, it is super helpful for you to know what is your natural way that you're relating to money, and then what are the ways that you can slide into an unhealthy way of viewing it. And so if you become self-aware, then you can actually repent openly with your spouse or with your roommates or parents and just say, I'm so sorry, I've been micromanaging. I have this tendency, and they can have some empathy for you. And then you look to Christ, look to how he relates to money, look to kind of be really kind of, most of the way we get off the rails with our dimension with money is because of fear. And Christ's love is perfect love that casts out all fear. And so I think just seeing the fear and then seeing how that's expressed and then causing trouble, so that if your acquisition, you're just wanting to level up constantly. You're not home because you're wanting to get the raise. You're wanting to, conquer the world, and then just being able to be self-aware and have a loved one kind of call you on it, and then for you to know, oh yeah, this isn't a game. This isn't something I have to level up on. It is something. I don't think you ever change, your dimension, but it is. You can move from unhealthy to healthy, and get some accountability partners. So best if the accountability partner is like a friend outside of the family unit, that can kind of ask you good, potent questions about what's happening. And you can kind of get a sense of, for me, I know when I'm starting to creep over to an unhealthy manager. And it's usually when I'm yelling at the grocery store not to put in that fancy cut of meat, something. I'm not yelling, but I know in my heart, I'm just like, oh,
Yeah.
and then I'm like, oh, maybe I'm trying to control things a little bit too much, and there's better ways
Yeah.
of managing this than trying to like, yeah, to help.
So one of the things that's making me think of that dynamic Linda and I we've had this conversation since we got married, and just yesterday we we were a little road trip, and so Linda went and got some food for us to kind of eat for lunch, and she stopped into Whole Foods, the
Oh, hope.
not cheap grocery store, and she comes out and has like this little kale and quinoa salad that's all wrapped up. And I just asked her, I'm like, how much was that? Just out of curiosity. And she's like, I don't know. I'm like, so you just have no, like, what if it was $25? Like, would you be happy? Like, would you think that's a fair price? And she's like, no. So anyway, so she's notorious for just, on the youth
Yeah,
side, it's like, I need it. I'm going to buy it. Like, I'm maybe I'll look at how much it costs. Whereas like me is more on the management side. I cannot fathom, especially at a place like Whole Foods, not
looking at
looking
the
at the
price.
prices.
Yeah. Oh man. So
Yeah.
I think just
So anyway.
practically, how great if you kind of have a little bit of that background, that narrative for each other, to have the empathy and then to be able to work through things a
Yeah.
little bit easier.
Yeah. No, I mean, and interestingly, like I have found, and I don't know if this is what Dr. Gallo, if Dr. Eileen Gallo ever talks about this at all, but it's interesting because I think some of the things that we've done to kind of improve our marriage, as I think about this, is actually me growing in the use a little
Yep.
bit and like learning to lean in that direction a little bit more, and her actually growing into the management a little bit
Yeah.
more. And so as she has gotten, and it's like I still drive on the management side because that's my default, but as she has gotten at least adequately involved so that she just isn't completely out of the loop by her own will, it's been better. And then the same token for me, I could tend toward just focusing on over management, over saving, or whatever the thing might be. And she has helped me balance me out by spending on some things and whatever, being a little bit more willing to spend some money on a vacation instead of it all going to the Roth IRA or whatever,
Right.
And so it's made our marriage healthier,
Yeah, no, I think it's great to have a balance. So Tammy, my wife, draws me away from being a monk. Like I would go towards monkish behavior very naturally, or chipmunk behavior where I'm like, there's a winter around the corner. There's always a winter. You always, be afraid, everyone. And, and so she'll liven me up, make me less of a doomsday kind of person. And then I help her kind of consider and she's actually, it's hard to get her to spend money in certain areas. And so I kind of like vacations. I'm the pusher on vacations because I'm more of an experiencer. But like for everything else, I don't spend money on. So, and she has categories, so we're learning kind of our different categories where we're like clothing. Like I don't want to, I don't want to spend a single dime on clothing or razors or anything that seems like to do with things that I don't think are important. But it is important, and she'll help reminding me that and help draw me into not looking homeless, in my as a and so anyway, so I always love if you can marry the hardest thing is if you marry a real natural big spender and then you're a real natural non-spender, that's the hardest combination. But if you're kind of both moderate in it and you're different, then I think it's a great thing. So
yeah, that's good. All right, well, there's so many other just fantastic nuggets in this book. So thank you for writing it. It's really good. Everybody run out, grab this book, Whole Heart Finances, a Jesus-centered guide to managing your money with joy. And so, I appreciate you writing it. Thank you for coming to chat. Yeah, so much wisdom here. We need to do this again and dive deep on a lot more stuff.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Shane.
Thanks so much. I'll see you.
I thought it was the best combination of personal finance and the Christian faith that I've ever read. This is what James said after he read our book, Simple Money, Rich Life.
And did you know that you can get a copy of this award-winning book for free?
You can get it on Amazon, but we so believe that the church needs this message that if you can cover shipping, we'd love to cover the cost of the book and send you a free copy.
All you need to do is go to seedtime.com/free to get yours.